I'm Rachel Morgan, 28, and I never thought I'd be screaming at my parents on my front lawn, but there they were, my mother, father, and a confused-looking locksmith trying to break into my house. A house they didn't know I'd bought until a week ago. Rachel, stop being dramatic, my mother hissed. We need to inspect this place. My father pointed at the door. Just open it, he told the locksmith. I sprinted up my walkway, keys clutched in my hand, heart pounding with the sudden realization that this invasion was only the beginning of my battle for independence. Before I tell you how I ended up in a standoff with my own parents, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever had family members who couldn't respect your boundaries, and subscribe for more stories about navigating difficult family dynamics. Now, let me take you back to how this all started. Growing up, my parents had opinions about everything I did, from my college major, they pushed for business instead of my preferred journalism, to my apartment choices. They insisted on co-signing and approving every lease. By 28, I was exhausted from the constant oversight but had managed to carve out some independence as a financial analyst at an investment firm downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days advising others on their financial futures while my own parents still treated me like I was financially illiterate. The housing market is too volatile, my father would say whenever I mentioned buying property. Renting is smarter in this economy, my mother would echo, despite having purchased their own home in their mid-20s. What my parents didn't know was that I'd been saving aggressively since my first job, while they thought I was barely making ends meet, a misconception I never corrected. I had actually accumulated enough for a substantial down payment. Their certainty that I couldn't possibly navigate a home purchase without their guidance gave me the perfect cover to do exactly that. It started innocently enough. During lunch breaks, I'd slip away to view properties in neighborhoods my parents would never visit. I told my realtor, Vanessa, about my situation, and she was surprisingly understanding. You'd be shocked how many adults I work with who are navigating family dynamics like this, she told me after our third viewing. Your parents aren't co-signing or contributing financially, right? When I confirmed they weren't, she nodded. Then legally, this is entirely your business. The cottage I eventually fell in love with wasn't impressive by my parents' standards, a 1,940 seconds two-bedroom with original hardwood floors and a small garden in a historic district they considered declining. But to me, it was perfect, affordable, charming, and most importantly, mine. The closing process was a masterclass in secrecy. I scheduled document signings during work hours, used my personal email rather than my family-accessible one, and had all calls directed to my cell phone. When the keys were finally handed to me, I felt an exhilarating mix of pride and terror. Moving in required equal stealth. For weeks, I gradually transported boxes in my car, telling my parents I was donating old items when they questioned my frequent trips. I purchased furniture piece by piece, setting up my new home on weekends when I claimed to be working overtime or meeting friends. Each item I placed, from the vintage reading chair in the corner to the photographs I hung on the walls, felt like a declaration of independence. At night, I'd sit on my back porch, looking at the stars from my property, feeling a sense of ownership I'd never experienced. For the first time, no one could tell me to move my things, change my decor, or criticize my choices. The freedom was intoxicating, but the anxiety of keeping such a significant secret was also exhausting. I constantly checked over my shoulder, worried my parents would somehow discover my deception. I rehearsed explanations and justifications, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. That confrontation came closer when I discovered the first betrayal. My mother had been tracking my location through our shared family app, something I'd forgotten existed since setting it up years ago during a family vacation. One evening, my phone lit up with her text. "Why does your location keep showing you in Oakwood Heights? Is there something going on we should know about?" I fabricated a story about a new friend living in the area, but the close call shook me. I immediately disabled all location sharing and prepared for the moment I'd have to reveal my secret. I just didn't expect that moment would come so soon or erupt so dramatically. Sunday family dinners had been a non-negotiable tradition since I moved out for college. Every week, I'd drive to my parents' suburban home for my mother's pot roast and my father's lengthy monologues about financial markets and the way things are going in this country. I'd nodded through these dinners for years, keeping the peace by sharing just enough about my life to satisfy their curiosity without inviting their criticism. That particular Sunday seemed like any other at first. My brother Mark was there with his fiancée, providing some buffer to the usual parental interrogation about my work, social life, and when I planned to settle down. The breaking point came unexpectedly, as my mother cleared the dinner plates and my father tapped his wine glass for attention. "Your mother and I have some exciting news," he announced, smiling with self-satisfaction. "We've found the perfect apartment for you." I froze mid-bite as he continued. "It's in the Westbrook building, you know, where the Hendersons live. 2 bedrooms, modern appliances, and most importantly, secure building with doorman. Best part is, it's only 15 minutes from us." My mother jumped in, already animated with plans. "We've set up a viewing for Tuesday afternoon. I've already made notes about which of your furniture will fit and what we'll need to replace. The rent is steep," my father continued, "but we've worked out a co-signing arrangement with the management. Much better than that outdated building you're in now." They continued talking, mapping out my life as if I were a chess piece they could position at will. Their voices faded into background noise as I realized this was the moment there would never be a good time to tell them. "I bought a house," I said quietly. The conversation around me continued for a beat before my words registered. "What did you say, dear?" my mother asked, her smile frozen in place. I said, "I bought a house. I've already moved in, actually." My voice grew stronger with each word. "I closed on it last month. It's in Oakwood Heights." The silence that followed was deafening. My brother Mark's eyes widened as he looked between me and our parents, clearly bracing for the explosion. "It came from my father first." "That's impossible," he said dismissively. "You can't afford a house." "Actually, I can. I've been saving since I started working. My credit score is excellent, and the mortgage was approved without any issues." My mother's face had gone pale. "You purchased property without consulting us? Without even telling us?" "Yes, but why would you do something so secretive?" Her voice trembled with what sounded like genuine hurt, though I knew it was at least partly tactical. My mother's tears had always been her most effective weapon, because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it, or take over the process, or tell me what I should want instead of respecting what I actually want. My father's expression had hardened into the look I'd dreaded my entire life, disappointment mixed with anger. "This is incredibly irresponsible, Rachel. The housing market is volatile right now. You have no experience with home ownership. The maintenance alone." "Dad, I researched everything thoroughly. I had inspections done. I've budgeted for maintenance and emergencies. I make good money, and my mortgage is actually less than what I was paying in rent." "You should have consulted us," he insisted, his voice rising. "We would have helped you avoid making a terrible mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," I said firmly. "And it wasn't your decision to make." My mother had progressed, from trembling lip to actual tears. "I just don't understand why you would exclude us from something so important. We're your parents. We only want what's best for you." "I know you believe that," I said gently. "But what you think is best for me and what actually is best for me aren't always the same thing." The dinner devolved rapidly after that. My father demanded to see the mortgage documents, insisting I must have been taken advantage of. My mother alternated between tearful accusations of betrayal and wounded statements about family loyalty. Even Mark, who typically stayed neutral in family conflicts, seemed stunned by my secrecy, though he remained silent throughout the argument. I left early, unable to endure the barrage of questions and recriminations. As I drove home to my home, my phone began lighting up with calls and texts, I ignored them all, needing space to process the confrontation. That night, I turned off my phone completely, choosing to sit on my back porch with a glass of wine, reminding myself that I had done nothing wrong. I had made a sound financial decision with my own money as a fully independent adult. The guilt I felt was conditioned, not deserved. When I finally turned my phone back on the next morning, I had 27 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from my parents, but several were from extended family members who had apparently already been informed of my betrayal. The final voicemail, left at 1:23 a.m., sent a chill down my spine. Rachel. My father's voice was calm in a way that signaled his deepest anger. This situation is unacceptable. If you won't let us help you fix this mistake, we'll find another way. This isn't over. I was still processing that threat when I received a notification from my bank. Someone had attempted to access information about my mortgage using my mother's maiden name as the security question answer. The second betrayal had already begun. My parents were trying to go behind my back to get information about my financial affairs. I never expected them to escalate so quickly. Just 3 days after the disastrous family dinner, I was returning from work, exhausted from a day of avoiding my colleagues' questions about why my mother had called the office twice looking for me. As I turned onto my street, I immediately spotted my parents' silver Lexus parked in front of my house. Standing on my front porch were 3 figures. My father in his business suit, my mother clutching her designer handbag, and a middle-aged man in a work uniform kneeling in front of my door, tools spread around him. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. They had actually brought a locksmith to break into my house. I slammed on my brakes, barely remembering to put my car in park before leaping out and running toward my front yard. "Hey! Stop! What are you doing?" I shouted. My mother turned, her expression shifting rapidly from surprise to defensive indignation. "Rachel, finally. We've been trying to reach you for days. What are you doing at my house? Who is this?" I demanded, gesturing toward the locksmith. My father stepped forward, using his boardroom voice, the one that expected immediate compliance. "We need to inspect this property, Rachel. You've made a major financial decision without proper guidance, and as your parents, we need to ensure you haven't been taken advantage of." "You have no right to be here," I said, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "This is my house. My name is on the deed and the mortgage. You can't just break in." "We're not breaking in," my mother said, as if I was being hysterical. "We're your parents. We're concerned about your safety in this." She glanced around the neighborhood with thinly veiled disapproval area. The locksmith looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between me and my parents. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" he asked me directly. "Yes, it's my house. I didn't authorize anyone to change my locks or enter without my permission." He began packing up his tools immediately. "Sir, ma'am, I can't continue this job. If the homeowner doesn't consent, she's our daughter," my father interrupted sharply. "This is a family matter." "I'm sorry, but that doesn't change the legal situation," the locksmith replied, standing up. "I can't assist in entering a property against the owner's wishes." My father's face reddened dangerously. "We've paid you a service fee already. I'll refund that, sir. But I can't proceed." By this point, several of my neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the scene unfold with undisguised curiosity. Mrs. Abernathy from next door was actually standing on her front lawn with her arms crossed, watching protectively. I'd only spoken to her a few times since moving in, but in that moment, I felt incredibly grateful for her presence. "You need to leave," I told my parents firmly. "This is trespassing." "Don't be ridiculous, Rachel," my mother hissed, clearly aware of our audience. "We're trying to help you. This house could have structural issues, plumbing problems. When was the last time the electrical was updated? These older homes are fire traps. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. My father's expression of shock would have been comical under different circumstances, You would call the authorities on your own parents? After everything we've done for you? Yes. I replied simply, and began dialing. What followed was 20 excruciating minutes of waiting for the police to arrive while my parents alternated between attempting to reason with me, threaten me, and guilt me into putting my phone away. The locksmith had retreated to his van, clearly wanting no part of the family drama. Mrs. Abernathy remained stationed on her lawn, occasionally making comments loud enough for us all to hear about respecting boundaries and grown children's independence. When Officer Daniels arrived, he approached with the weary expression of someone who had responded to many family disputes. After checking my ID and confirming I was indeed the legal owner of the property, he explained the situation to my parents with remarkable patience. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, I understand your concerns as parents, but your daughter is a legal adult and the verified owner of this residence. You don't have the right to enter her property without permission, regardless of your relationship. We have rights as her parents, my father insisted, using the authoritative tone that had intimidated me my entire life but seemed to have zero effect on Officer Daniels. Not to her property, sir. Not without her consent. My mother tried a different approach, her voice breaking. Officer, we're just worried about her safety. This neighborhood is within my patrol area, ma'am, and has one of the lowest crime rates in the district, Officer Daniels completed smoothly. I could have hugged him for that. As my parents reluctantly prepared to leave the police presence having made further arguments untenable, my father turned to me with a look of betrayal. I made a copy, you know. A copy of what? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Your keys. When you left them on the counter at dinner last month, I thought it might be useful in an emergency. His tone made it clear he considered my home purchase exactly such an emergency. The third betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own father had stolen my keys, made a copy without my knowledge or permission, and had been planning to use them to enter my home without consent. The violation of trust was staggering. That would be a legal entry, sir. Officer Daniels interjected, having overheard. I strongly advise against using that key. After they finally drove away, Officer Daniels recommended I change my locks immediately and documented the incident in case further issues arose. As his patrol car pulled away, I sat down on my front steps, overwhelmed by the confrontation and the realization that this conflict was far from over. The house I had bought to gain independence had become the battleground for a war I never wanted to fight. Within 48 hours of the locksmith incident, it seemed like every member of my extended family had an opinion about my home purchase and the subsequent disrespect I'd shown my parents. My phone became a battlefield of incoming calls, texts, and voicemails, most condemning, some confused, and a precious few supportive. Aunt Marion, my mother's older sister, was the first to launch an offensive. Rachel Morgan. She began without preamble when I answered her call, foolishly thinking it might be work-related. What on earth are you thinking? Treating your parents this way? Your mother is absolutely heartbroken. Aunt Marion. Don't interrupt, she snapped. Your parents have sacrificed everything for you. Everything. And this is how you repay them? Buying a house in secret and then humiliating them in front of the entire neighborhood? Involving the police? I've never been so disappointed. She continued in this vein for several minutes, not allowing me to speak, before concluding. You need to apologize immediately and let them help you fix this mess you've created. Similar calls followed from my Uncle Robert, 2 older cousins, and even my grandmother, though her approach was more bewildered than accusatory. I just don't understand, sweetheart, she said softly. Why wouldn't you want your parents' help with such a big decision? They only want what's best for you. It was the same phrase I'd heard my entire life. They only want what's best for you, used to justify every intrusion, every overridden preference, every dismissed dream. The unspoken assumption was always that I couldn't possibly know what was best for myself. Not everyone joined the parental chorus, however. My cousin Stephanie, 2 years younger than me and still living at home, texted me privately. Don't tell anyone I said this, but I think what you did is badass. Also, can we have coffee sometime? I need tips on how to establish boundaries. The most complex reaction came from my brother Mark. As the firstborn, he had shouldered different parental expectations than I had, conforming to their vision more naturally and thus experiencing less friction. He called me a week after the locksmith incident, his tone carefully neutral. So, you bought a house, he began. I did. And didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell mom and dad, I clarified. Because I knew exactly how they would react. Which was exactly how they did react, Mark. They tried to break into my house. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, that was extreme. But Rach, you have to understand. You shocked them. They had no idea you were even thinking about buying property. Because every time I brought it up, they shut me down immediately. They've never taken my goals seriously. That's not entirely fair, he said, though without much conviction. They've supported you in lots of ways. They've supported the version of me they want me to be, I corrected. Not who I actually am. We went back and forth like this for nearly an hour, neither fully convincing the other. Mark was trying to be the family mediator as always, but I could tell he was genuinely torn between understanding my position and his lifelong role as the good son who smoothed over family conflicts. The true test came at the family gathering for our grandmother's birthday. I'd considered skipping it to avoid drama but decided that would only give my parents more ammunition about my selfishness. The moment I walked into my grandparents' home, I could feel the tension. Conversations paused momentarily as relatives assessed which side of the conflict I represented. My mother had positioned herself as the wounded party, dabbing at her eyes periodically when conversations turned her way. My father maintained a stony silence toward me while being overly jovial with everyone else. The entire dynamic was exhausting. Rachel, my uncle David cornered me by the punch bowl. Your father tells me you bought some fixer-upper in the old district. You know those places are money pits, right? Probably needs a new roof, foundation work. Actually, it passed inspection with flying colors, I replied politely. The previous owners took excellent care of it. Well, I'm sure your father would be happy to look it over properly. You can't trust those inspectors, half of them miss major issues. Before I could respond, my cousin Eric's wife joined the conversation. I heard it's in Oakwood Heights. Isn't that area getting a bit, you know? She lowered her voice dramatically. Unsafe? Crime rates are actually lower than in my parents' neighborhood, I said, maintaining my smile with effort. Throughout the evening, I fielded similar concerned comments, each disguising criticism or skepticism about my judgment. By the time dinner was served, I was emotionally drained from defending my decision to people who had no stake in it whatsoever. The climax came during dessert when my mother made a tearful toast to family unity and supporting each other through difficult times, while looking pointedly in my direction. My father followed with comments about young people making impulsive decisions and the importance of listening to those with more experience. As relatives nodded sagely, I realized with startling clarity that this wasn't actually about my house. It was about control, about my parents' inability to accept that I could make major life decisions without their input or approval. And more disturbingly, about the family system that had always enabled and reinforced their behavior. The fourth betrayal emerged the next day when my coworker Jennifer approached my desk hesitantly. Rachel, I don't want to overstep, but is everything okay? Your mother called the HR department yesterday asking about employee assistance programs. She mentioned you were having some mental health struggles that might be affecting your work performance. The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. My own mother had attempted to undermine my professional reputation by suggesting I was mentally unstable, all because I had exercised my independence in a way she couldn't control. The manipulation had reached a new level, moving beyond family boundaries into my workplace. That night, I sat in my garden, the small, peaceful space that had been one of the house's main selling points for me and tried to process the escalating situation. The family I had always struggled to please but ultimately trusted had revealed themselves to be willing to go to disturbing lengths to maintain their authority over my life. The realization was both heartbreaking and strangely liberating. For the first time, I allowed myself to see the family dynamics clearly, without the fog of obligation and conditioning that had always clouded my perspective. What I saw wasn't pretty, but it was real, and facing that reality was the first step toward truly claiming not just my house, but my life as my own. The workplace invasion was only the beginning. 3 days after Jennifer's revelation about my mother's call to HR, I was in the middle of presenting quarterly projections to our investment team when I saw them through the conference room's glass wall. My parents, standing at the reception desk, my father gesturing emphatically while my mother clutched her handbag with white knuckles. My voice faltered mid-sentence as our receptionist Amber pointed in my direction, her expression apologetic. My boss, Daniel, followed my gaze and frowned. "Rachel? Is everything all right?" "I'm sorry," I managed, trying to regain my composure. "Those are my parents. They shouldn't be here." Daniel's frown deepened. "We're in the middle of a meeting." Amber knows not to interrupt, but my parents had already brushed past Amber, my father leading the charge down the hallway toward the conference room. Daniel rose from his seat as my father opened the door without knocking. "Excuse me," my father announced to the room of stunned colleagues. "We need a moment with our daughter. Family emergency." The mortification was absolute. I felt the blood drain from my face as every head turned toward me. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," Daniel said smoothly, stepping forward. "I'm Daniel Whitaker, department head. I'm afraid we're in the middle of a crucial presentation. If there's an emergency, our HR department can assist you in reaching Rachel afterward." My mother's eyes filled with practiced tears. "It's about her housing situation. Very urgent. We wouldn't interrupt if it wasn't absolutely necessary." Daniel glanced at me, clearly expecting an explanation. "There is no emergency," I said firmly, finding my voice. "My parents are unhappy about a personal decision I've made and are attempting to pressure me into changing my mind. I apologize for the interruption." The silence in the conference room was excruciating. My father's face reddened dangerously. "Rachel, this is completely inappropriate," he hissed. "We're trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake." "Security has been called," Amber announced from the doorway, her phone still in hand. "They'll be here shortly to escort you out." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. My parents were indeed escorted from the building, protesting loudly about ungrateful children and family concerns the entire way. I somehow managed to finish my presentation on autopilot, though I have no memory of what I actually said. Afterward, Daniel asked me to stay behind. "Rachel, I've always known you as a consummate professional. What I witnessed today was concerning." "I'm so sorry," I began, but he held up a hand. "I don't need apologies. I need to know if this is going to be an ongoing issue that affects your work." The question forced me to confront the escalating reality of my situation. My parents had now invaded my home and my workplace. Where would they draw the line? "It won't happen again," I promised. "I'm implementing stronger boundaries immediately." That evening became a whirlwind of practical security measures. I changed my phone number, creating a new contact list that notably excluded my parents and several extended family members. I installed email filters to redirect family messages to a separate folder I could check when emotionally prepared. I contacted my bank, investment accounts, and credit cards to add verbal passwords that my parents couldn't possibly guess. The physical security of my home required more attention. I hired a locksmith, a different one, to change all my locks and install a deadbolt. I purchased a simple security camera for my front porch and motion-activated lights for the perimeter of my property. These practical steps were empowering but couldn't address the emotional devastation I was experiencing. Alone in my kitchen that night, the magnitude of what was happening finally overwhelmed me. I sank to the floor, back against the refrigerator, and broke down completely. Deep, racking sobs tore through me as I grieved the family relationship I had always wanted but now realized I had never actually had. A soft knock at my back door startled me from my breakdown. Through the curtain, I could see a woman's silhouette. Panic surged briefly until the person called out, "Rachel? It's Diana from next door. Just checking if you're okay." Diana Miller had waved to me a few times since I moved in, but we hadn't spoken much beyond brief greetings. I wiped my eyes hastily and opened the door. "I made too much pasta," she said immediately, holding out a covered dish. Then, taking in my tear-streaked face, "Bad day?" Something about her matter-of-fact kindness broke through my defenses. "The worst," I admitted. She nodded as if this was completely normal. "Eat something. Then tell me about it if you want. Or don't. But definitely eat." Diana was 50-ish, an artist who worked from her home studio, with an easy manner that put me instantly at ease. Over pasta shared at my kitchen table, I found myself telling her the entire saga. She listened without interruption, occasionally refilling our wine glasses. "Boundaries," she said finally, when I'd finished. "That's what this is all about. And they're fighting like hell because you're finally establishing them." "I never meant to cause such a war," I said miserably. "You didn't," she replied firmly. "They did, by refusing to respect your autonomy. Look, I went through something similar with my ex-husband, different relationship. Same dynamic, someone who claimed to love me but needed to control every aspect of my life for it to feel like love to them." Her perspective was like a light switching on in a dark room. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had walked this path before and emerged intact on the other side. Before she left that night, she wrote down the name and number of her therapist and invited me to join her and some friends for dinner that weekend. "You need allies right now," she said simply. "People who see you clearly and support your independence." The following days brought more intrusions. My parents began sending family friends to check on me. People would show up unannounced, claiming to be in the neighborhood but obviously there to report back on my mental state and living conditions. I began keeping my curtains drawn and using my back door to avoid these ambushes. Then came the certified letters, formal demands for repayment of family debts, including my college tuition, which had been covered by a combination of scholarships and grants, with minimal parental contribution, portions of family vacations, and even clothes they had purchased for me as a teenager. The transparent attempt to create financial pressure was almost laughable, except for the pain behind it. The fifth betrayal struck deepest of all. My mortgage lender called to inform me that someone claiming to be my father had contacted them, alleging potential fraud in my mortgage application. They had initiated a review of my file as a standard procedure following such allegations. "We don't anticipate any issues," the representative assured me. "Your application was thoroughly vetted. But we are required to investigate any fraud claims." The deliberate attempt to potentially damage my home ownership cut to the core. This was no longer about expressing disapproval or trying to help me see the error of my ways. This was a calculated attack on the independence I had worked so hard to achieve. My parents had shown me exactly how far they were willing to go to maintain control. Now I needed to show them exactly how serious I was about establishing boundaries, no matter how painful the process might be. The fraud allegation was the breaking point that pushed me to seek professional help. That evening, after a tearful call with my mortgage lender assuring them I had all documentation to prove the legitimacy of my application, I sat at my computer and typed "controlling parents' adult children" into the search bar. What appeared was a revelation: thousands of resources, articles, forums, and support groups dedicated to exactly what I was experiencing. I read first-hand accounts that mirrored my situation with eerie accuracy. Adults describing parents who monitored their bank accounts, showed up at their workplaces, threatened their landlords, or sabotaged their relationships, all in the name of love and parental concern. The patterns were so similar it was as if these strangers were describing my own parents. Terms like enmeshment, emotional incest, and narcissistic parenting appeared repeatedly. I found myself taking notes, highlighting passages that resonated, and for the first time, feeling less alone in my struggle. There was a name for what I was experiencing. There were others who had walked this path before me. And most importantly, there were strategies for establishing and maintaining boundaries. I joined an online support forum that night, creating a username my parents would never recognize. I posted a brief summary of my situation, expecting perhaps a few responses. By morning, dozens of people had commented with support, advice, and their own stories. The validation was overwhelming. Using Diana's recommendation, I contacted Dr. Winters and scheduled an appointment for the following day. Her office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, warm and inviting with none of the sterile clinical feel I had feared. Dr. Winters herself was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through social niceties. "Tell me why you're here, Rachel," she said once we were seated. I began with the house purchase, then backtracked to explain the history of my relationship with my parents, their controlling tendencies, and the recent escalation. Dr. Winters listened intently, occasionally making notes but mostly maintaining eye contact as I unloaded the entire story. "What you're describing," she said when I finally ran out of words, "is a classic pattern of emotional manipulation and enmeshment. Your parents never completed the psychological task of allowing you to individuate to become a separate person with your own desires and boundaries." "Why?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me. "Why can't they just be happy for me?" "Because your independence threatens their self-image and their sense of purpose," she explained. Some parents build their entire identity around being needed by their children. When that child demonstrates they don't need that level of involvement, it creates an existential crisis for the parent. Over the next hour, Dr. Winters introduced me to concepts that helped frame my experience. She explained parentification, how I had been forced to manage my parents' emotions from a young age, prioritizing their feelings over my own. She described infantilization, the ways they had undermined my confidence in my own decision-making to keep me dependent on their guidance. "The purchasing of your house was a powerful act of differentiation," she noted. "You declared your separateness in a way they couldn't ignore or minimize. Their extreme reaction is proportional to the threat they perceive to the established dynamic." "So, what do I do now?" I asked, feeling both validated and overwhelmed by this new framework for understanding my family. "You continue building your boundary muscles," she replied. "Think of boundaries like any other skill. They require practice, consistency, and the willingness to experience discomfort during the learning process." She helped me develop specific strategies for maintaining boundaries, including scripts for common scenarios, techniques for managing my emotional responses to manipulation, and practical advice for limiting contact without cutting ties completely if that wasn't my goal. I left that first session with a strange mix of sadness and hope, sad for the healthy parent-child relationship I had never had, but hopeful that I could build something better for my future. That weekend, Diana introduced me to her circle of friends at a dinner party in her backyard. There was Michael, a literature professor with a booming laugh; Jade, a pediatric nurse with a passion for gardening; Elena, a recently divorced attorney raising 2 teenagers; and Jason, a graphic designer who immediately connected with me over our shared experience with controlling parents. "My dad managed my bank accounts until I was 27. He told me when we found ourselves chatting by Diana's herb garden. When I finally took control of my own finances, he didn't speak to me for 6 months. Called it financial abandonment." "How did you handle it?" I asked. "Badly at first," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Lots of guilt, second-guessing myself. But eventually I found a support group, got some therapy, and realized I wasn't actually doing anything wrong by living my own life." As the evening progressed, I felt a weight lifting. These people accepted me as I was, with no expectations or judgments. They asked questions about my interests and opinions, genuinely curious rather than looking for opportunities to correct or guide me. It was refreshing in a way I hadn't even known I needed. By the time I returned home, I had phone numbers from everyone and plans to meet Jason for coffee, to discuss an online support group he facilitated for adult children of controlling parents. For the first time since the Locksmith incident, I felt something like optimism, not about reconciling with my parents on their terms, but about building a life that included meaningful connections with people who respected my autonomy. Over the following weeks, I attended Dr. Winter's sessions regularly, participated in both online and in-person support groups, and gradually built a network of friends who understood healthy boundaries. Jason became my first true ally in this journey, having walked a similar path and emerged stronger on the other side. The guilt is the hardest part, he told me during one of our coffee meetings. They installed those buttons in you from birth, and they know exactly how to push them. The trick is learning to feel the guilt without letting it drive your actions. It was a profound insight that helped me navigate the increasingly frantic attempts my parents made to regain access to my life. As I grew more confident in my boundaries, I found myself less reactive to their tactics. The emotional hooks that had always pulled me back into unhealthy patterns began to lose their power. One evening, sitting in my garden that had become a symbol of my independence, I realized something important. The house wasn't just a financial investment or even just a home. It was a physical manifestation of the internal boundaries I was learning to build. Its walls and locked doors were tangible expressions of the psychological boundaries I was finally establishing. Perhaps that's why my parents had reacted so violently to its purchase on some level. They understood its true significance before I did. With this new understanding, I began to see my house differently. Each improvement I made, painting a room, planting flowers in the garden, hanging artwork, wasn't just about creating a pleasant living space. It was an act of self-definition, a declaration of who I was apart from my parents' vision for me. And with each such act, I grew stronger in my resolve to maintain the boundaries necessary for a healthy adult life. The mortgage fraud investigation was dismissed quickly, given my immaculate documentation and credit history. But the attempt itself signaled a dangerous escalation from my parents. They were now willing to potentially damage my financial standing to regain control. It was time to move from defensive boundaries to a more proactive approach. On Dr. Winter's recommendation, I consulted with attorney Sarah Chen, who specialized in family law and harassment cases. Her office was sleek and modern, much like Sarah herself, direct, efficient, and refreshingly straightforward. Based on what you've told me, she said after reviewing my documentation of the various incidents, you have grounds for harassment claims and potentially a restraining order, though that's a more extreme step I wouldn't recommend yet. I don't want to take legal action against my own parents, I admitted, but I need them to understand there are consequences to violating my boundaries. Sarah nodded. Then let's start with a formal cease and desist letter. It has no legal binding power in itself, but it establishes a paper trail if things escalate further, and sometimes the official letterhead alone is enough to make people reconsider their actions. We spent an hour drafting a letter that was firm but not inflammatory. It outlined specific behaviors that needed to stop immediately: coming to my workplace, attempting to access my financial information, making false claims to institutions, sending people to my home unannounced, and the ongoing harassment via family members. The key is documentation, Sarah emphasized as our meeting concluded. Keep recording every incident: dates, times, who was involved, what was said. Save emails, texts, voicemails. If they cross the line into genuine harassment or defamation, we'll have everything we need to take more serious action. I left her office with a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my parents' intrusions, I was taking proactive steps to protect myself and establish clear consequences for boundary violations. The cease and desist letters were delivered by courier the following day, one to my parents' home and another to my father's office, ensuring they couldn't claim to have not received it. I braced myself for the inevitable backlash. It came in the form of my brother Mark, who called that evening, his voice tight with stress. A legal letter, Rachel? Really? Do you have any idea what this has done to Mom and Dad? I imagine they're upset, I replied calmly, using the techniques Dr. Winters had taught me for these confrontations. Dad is talking about disowning you. Mom hasn't stopped crying since it arrived. Was that really necessary? Yes, Mark, it was. They tried to interfere with my mortgage by making false fraud allegations. They showed up at my workplace and caused a scene that nearly cost me my job. They attempted to break into my house. Normal conversations and requests haven't worked. Mark was silent for a moment. I didn't know about the mortgage thing. He finally said, his voice less certain. There's a lot you don't know. They're not telling you everything. Then tell me, he said. Help me understand why it's come to this. For the next hour, I walked Mark through the events of the past weeks in detail, including the more subtle manipulations that he wouldn't have witnessed. By the end, his tone had shifted noticeably. I knew they were having trouble letting go, but I didn't realize. He trailed off. Look, I'm supposed to invite you to my birthday dinner next weekend. Mom and Dad will be there. If you don't come, it'll just confirm their narrative that you're having some kind of breakdown. If you do come, it'll be tense, but at least you can show everyone you're perfectly fine. The invitation presented a dilemma. Avoiding family gatherings would only isolate me further and potentially reinforce whatever stories my parents were telling. Attending meant facing direct confrontation, but also provided an opportunity to demonstrate my new boundaries in person. I'll be there, I decided. But if they start anything, I'm leaving immediately. The dinner was at Mark's favorite steakhouse, neutral territory, at least. I arrived deliberately last, wearing an outfit that projected confidence, a simple blue dress that I knew flattered me, with my grandmother's pearl earrings that always made me feel connected to my family history in a positive way. The table fell silent as I approached. My parents sat stiffly on one side, my father's face impassive, my mother's eyes already glistening with unshed tears. My Aunt Marian and Uncle Robert were there too, along with Mark and his fiancée Jen. I took the empty seat beside Jen, directly across from my mother. Happy birthday, Mark, I said warmly, handing him a small wrapped package. Sorry I'm late. The tension was palpable as conversation resumed haltingly. My father avoided addressing me directly, while my mother alternated between pointed sighs and trembling lip movements designed to elicit concern. I maintained pleasant, neutral conversation, focusing primarily on Mark, Jen, and safe topics like recent movies and local events. It wasn't until the main course arrived that my mother made her first direct attack. Rachel, you're looking thin, she said with exaggerated concern. Are you eating properly in that house? You know older kitchens often have inadequate appliances for proper meal preparation. I'm eating very well, actually, I replied evenly. I've been enjoying cooking in my new kitchen. The vintage stove has great character and works perfectly. Well, you've always been somewhat impulsive about these things, she continued, rushing into decisions without considering all angles. Your father and I just want to help you avoid mistakes that could affect your future. I took a deliberate breath before responding, remembering Dr. Winter's advice about not engaging with provocations. I appreciate concern, but I'm very happy with my decision. The house was thoroughly inspected and is in excellent condition. Legal letters and police involvement seem like an extreme way to treat family who care about you, my father interjected, breaking his silence. Your mother and I deserved better than that. The table fell silent again, all eyes moving between us like spectators at a tennis match. I sent that letter because normal requests for boundaries weren't being respected, I said calmly. I would have preferred to handle this privately, but that option was taken away when you showed up at my workplace, tried to access my financial records, and attempted to enter my home without permission. Aunt Marian gasped dramatically. Rachel, your father was just concerned about your safety. My safety doesn't require breaking into my house or jeopardizing my professional reputation, I replied, maintaining my composure despite my racing heart. This isn't like you, Rachel, my mother said, a tear finally escaping down her cheek right on cue. You've always been such a considerate daughter. I just don't understand what's happened to turn you against your family like this. In the past, those tears would have devastated me, sending me into a spiral of guilt and concession. But now, with weeks of therapy and support group insights behind me, I could see the manipulation for what it was. I'm not against anyone, I said clearly. I'm simply establishing healthy adult boundaries. I love my house, I'm managing my finances responsibly, and I'm happy with my decisions. I'm still the same person, I'm just asking for my independence to be respected. My father's expression darkened. If you were truly the same person, you wouldn't be treating your mother this way. Do you have any idea what your behavior has done to her health? Her blood pressure is through the roof because of the stress you're causing. And there it was, the ultimate manipulation tactic. My mother's health had always been the nuclear option in family conflicts, the unbeatable argument that immediately shifted all blame to whoever had caused her latest episode. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. But I'm not responsible for managing Mom's emotional reactions or health conditions. That's between her and her doctor. The table collectively inhaled at what would once have been unthinkable heresy in our family dynamic. Mark, sensing the situation spiraling, quickly changed the subject to his upcoming work project. The rest of the dinner proceeded in a state of fragile détente, with my parents periodically shooting wounded looks in my direction but refraining from further direct confrontation. As we were leaving, my brother pulled me aside in the restaurant lobby. That was different, he said, studying my face. You've changed. I'm just finally standing up for myself, I replied. He nodded slowly. It's good, actually. Weird to witness, but good. For what it's worth, I think you handled that really well. It was the first time Mark had openly supported my position against our parents, and the validation meant more than I could express. Thanks for saying that. They'll adjust eventually, he added, though his tone lacked conviction. They have to, right? I smiled sadly, suspecting we both knew the answer wasn't that simple. My parents' worldview fundamentally required my compliance and dependence. My independence wasn't just a behavior they disliked, it threatened the very foundation of how they understood our relationship and their role in my life. As I drove home that night, I realized I had crossed an important threshold. I had sat across from my parents, faced their most potent emotional manipulation tactics, and maintained my boundaries without crumbling. The guilt and anxiety were still there, but they no longer controlled my actions. More importantly, Mark, who had always straddled the fence, had finally shown signs of understanding my perspective. Having an ally within the family, even a tentative one, shifted the dynamic in ways that might eventually lead to healthier relationships for all of us. The house lights were on when I arrived home. I'd started leaving them on timer switches after the Locksmith incident. As I walked up my front path, I felt a sense of homecoming that went beyond the physical structure. This house represented the person I was becoming, someone who could stand firm in her own truth, even when surrounded by voices insisting she was wrong. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and noticed a text from Diana. Survived the dragon's den? Come over for dessert and debrief if you're up for company. I smiled and replied that I'd be there in 10 minutes. My chosen family was waiting, ready to celebrate this small but significant victory with me. 3 weeks of relative calm followed the birthday dinner. My parents maintained a chilly distance, communicating only through Mark about necessary family matters. I used this reprieve to focus on making my house truly mine, painting the living room a warm terracotta that would have horrified my mother's traditional sensibilities, installing bookshelves for my growing collection, and working with Diana to plant perennials in the garden that would return year after year, putting down roots just as I was. Dr. Winters helped me use this peaceful period to strengthen my internal boundaries, preparing for the inevitable next confrontation. They're regrouping, she warned during one session. This withdrawal is tactical, not acceptance. Be ready for a different approach. She was right. The calm shattered on a Saturday morning as I was enjoying coffee on my front porch. A familiar silver Lexus pulled up, and my parents emerged not combative this time, but somber. My father was dressed in what I recognized as his serious business suit, my mother in subdued beige, her expression carefully composed. My body tensed immediately, fight or flight instincts kicking in. But I remained seated, reminding myself that this was my home, my territory. They approached slowly, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "Rachel," my father began formally, "we'd like to speak with you. May we come up?" The polite request was so unlike their previous invasive approaches that it momentarily threw me. I considered my options, deciding that a conversation on my own terms was preferable to continued Cold War. "You can join me on the porch," I said, gesturing to the other chairs. "Would you like coffee?" They declined the coffee but took seats, my father perching stiffly at the edge of his chair as if afraid to appear too comfortable in this space he hadn't approved. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About your house, your independence, our relationship moving forward." I waited, saying nothing, another technique I'd learned, allowing silence to draw out their true intentions rather than rushing to fill the conversational void. "Your mother and I have discussed it extensively, and we've come to a decision." He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "We're prepared to accept your purchase of this house, under certain conditions." I almost laughed at the presumption that their acceptance was required, but managed to maintain my neutral expression. "What conditions?" "First, we want a professional contractor of our choosing to conduct a thorough inspection, with any necessary repairs or upgrades completed promptly." He raised a hand as I began to object. "At our expense, of course." "Second, we want to be involved in any major decisions regarding the property renovations, financial considerations, security measures." "Third," my mother interjected, her voice quavering slightly, "weekly family dinners would resume, alternating between our home and yours, so we can maintain proper family connections." "And finally," my father concluded, "you'll remove those legal threats. No more letters from attorneys, no more talk of harassment or restraining orders. We're family, and family matters stay within the family." I took a slow sip of my coffee, processing their offer, which was really just a repackaging of the same control they'd always exerted, now with a veneer of respecting my ownership. "I appreciate you coming here and speaking with me directly," I began carefully. "That's a positive step. But what you're proposing isn't acceptance of my independence, it's just a different form of oversight and control." My father's jaw tightened. "We're trying to meet you halfway, Rachel. Your mother hasn't slept properly in weeks because of this situation." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely, "but I can't accept these conditions. My house isn't up for negotiation or external management. I'm happy to work toward rebuilding our relationship, but it has to be based on mutual respect for each other's boundaries." "Boundaries," my father repeated, the word sounding foreign and distasteful in his mouth. "This modern obsession with boundaries is just selfishness by another name. Family doesn't have boundaries, Rachel. Family supports each other, stays involved in each other's lives. Healthy families have boundaries," I corrected gently. "They're not walls to keep people out, they're guidelines for how we interact with respect for each other's autonomy." My mother, who had been surprisingly restrained until now, suddenly leaned forward. "Do you have any idea how this looks to everyone? Our daughter, secretively buying a house, then involving police and lawyers against her own parents? People are talking, Rachel. The Hendersons asked if you were having some kind of breakdown. Even Reverend Phillips mentioned his concern last Sunday." "I can't control what people think or say," I replied. "But I know I'm making healthy choices for myself, even if they're difficult." My father stood abruptly. "This is our final attempt, Rachel. We're trying to be reasonable, to find a compromise that preserves the family relationship while acknowledging your desire for independence." He straightened his jacket with a familiar gesture of authority. "If you can't meet us even partway, then you're making a choice about what kind of relationship you want with us going forward. or whether you want one at all. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. In the past, such a threat would have immediately broken my resolve, sent me scrambling to appease and reconcile. But now, after weeks of therapy, support groups, and genuine friendship, I understood that this was the core manipulation that had controlled me my entire life, the implicit threat of family abandonment if I didn't comply with their demands. I stood to face them directly. I want a relationship with you both. I love you, and that hasn't changed. But I won't accept conditions that undermine my autonomy as an adult. I won't give you oversight of my home or financial decisions. I won't pretend that the intrusions and manipulation of the past weeks didn't happen. I took a deep breath before continuing. What I will offer is this. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship on new, healthier terms. That means respecting each other's boundaries, communicating directly instead of through family members or third parties, and acknowledging that I'm an adult capable of making my own decisions, even if you disagree with them. My mother's eyes filled with genuine tears, not the tactical ones I was accustomed to. You're really choosing this house over your family, aren't you? No, Mom. I'm choosing a healthy adult relationship over an unhealthy dependent one. The house is just a symbol of that choice. My father's expression had hardened into something I rarely saw directed at me, genuine anger rather than calculated disappointment. I see you've made up your mind. And so have we. He placed his hand on my mother's shoulder. Come on, Margaret. We've said what we came to say. As they walked back to their car, my mother glanced back once with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, sadness mixed with something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. My father didn't look back at all. I remained on the porch long after their car disappeared down the street, processing the enormity of what had just happened. I had faced their ultimatum and chosen my own path, knowing it might mean genuine estrangement rather than just temporary disapproval. The grief hit in waves, not for the relationship we'd had, which I now recognized as unhealthy, but for the relationship we might have had in a different world with different patterns. I allowed myself to feel that grief fully, sitting with it rather than trying to escape it. Dr. Winters had emphasized that acknowledging loss was an important part of establishing healthy boundaries, that sometimes the path to greater wholeness required mourning what couldn't be. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across my porch, I felt an unexpected sense of peace beneath the sadness. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had spoken my truth without flinching, without qualifying, without immediately undermining it to keep others comfortable. Whatever came next, I would face it as my authentic self. I went inside and called Mark, knowing he would soon be caught in the crossfire. He answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting for my call. They just left here, he said without preamble. Dad's furious. Mom's crying. What happened? I explained the confrontation as objectively as possible, emphasizing that I had expressed willingness to work on our relationship, just not under their controlling conditions. Mark was quiet for a long moment after I finished. You know, he finally said, I always thought you were the lucky one. They were so much harder on me, growing up, higher expectations, more pressure. But now I see it differently. They controlled me through pressure, but they controlled you through emotional manipulation. Maybe neither of us got what we needed. His insight startled me. I never thought of it that way. I admitted. For what it's worth, he continued, I think you're doing the right thing. It's hard to watch. Hard to be in the middle. I know, and I'm sorry for that. I never wanted to put you in this position. You didn't, he said firmly. They did. And maybe it's time I established some better boundaries too. After we hung up, I walked through my house, touching the walls, the door frames, the windows that had become so much more than just a financial investment. This space had catalyzed a transformation far beyond property ownership. It had become the battleground where I finally fought for and won the right to my own life. 6 months passed, a half year marked by seasons changing in my garden and gradual shifts in my family dynamic. The immediate aftermath of the porch confrontation had been difficult. 3 weeks of complete silence from my parents, followed by carefully neutral text messages relayed primarily through Mark. The first thaw came unexpectedly, in the form of a birthday card from my mother containing a brief, handwritten note. "Thinking of you today. Hope you're well." No guilt, no demands, no emotional manipulation, just a simple acknowledgement. I responded with a brief thank you text, equally neutral but sincere. Small exchanges followed occasional texts, brief phone calls limited to safe topics. My father remained more distant, communicating primarily through my mother, but the open hostility had subsided. We were finding our way toward a new normal, not the intimacy they had demanded nor the complete estrangement I had feared, but something in between, a relationship defined by careful respect rather than assumed access. Throughout those months, my house truly became my home. Each room transformed through intentional choices that reflected my personality and preferences rather than my parents' expectations. The living room walls, now that warm terracotta that had initially felt daringly rebellious, had come to feel simply right, cozy and grounding. The vintage kitchen had proven perfectly functional for my needs, hosting small dinner gatherings with my growing circle of friends. The garden had become my particular joy. Diana had patiently taught me the basics of perennial planting, and together we had transformed the small backyard into a colorful, fragrant sanctuary. I found unexpected peace in the rhythm of gardening, the preparation, planting, nurturing, and patient waiting for results that couldn't be rushed. There was a metaphor there that wasn't lost on me. My friendship with Diana had deepened into something that felt more like family than mere neighborly connection. Her circle had become mine as well: Michael with his literary references and booming laugh, Jade who brought cuttings from her garden and herbal tea for any ailment, Elena who offered legal insights and parenting wisdom from raising her teenagers alone, and Jason, who had moved from being a support group connection to a close friend whose understanding of family dynamics matched my own. Professionally, I had found my footing again after the workplace confrontation. Daniel had been surprisingly supportive once he understood the situation, even implementing a security protocol that prevented my parents from accessing our office floor without proper clearance, a boundary I hadn't had to request but appreciated deeply. As Thanksgiving approached, I faced a decision about holiday plans. In previous years, attendance at my parents' elaborate Thanksgiving dinner had been mandatory, with my mother orchestrating every detail according to long-established tradition. This year, no invitation had been extended, leaving the holiday open in a way that felt both disorienting and liberating. After discussing it with Dr. Winters during our now monthly check-in sessions, I decided to host my own Thanksgiving dinner, not as a replacement for family tradition, but as the establishment of new traditions that honored my current life rather than just my history. The guest list came together naturally: Diana, Michael, Jade, Elena and her teenagers, Jason, and a few colleagues who weren't traveling home for the holiday. After considerable reflection, I also invited Mark and his now wife Jen, who had married in a small ceremony during the summer, and, in a moment of either courage or foolishness, I extended an invitation to my parents as well, with clear parameters: dinner at my house, on my terms, with respectful behavior expected from everyone. I didn't expect them to accept. When Mark called to tell me they were considering it, I was genuinely shocked. "Mom wants to come," he explained. "Dad's more hesitant, but I think he'll agree to keep the peace. Just be prepared for some awkwardness." "I can handle awkward," I replied. "I just can't handle controlling." The morning of Thanksgiving dawned clear and crisp. I had prepared as much as possible the day before, with Diana coming over to help with pies and side dishes. My table was set simply but beautifully, with mismatched vintage plates I'd collected from thrift stores and fresh flowers from what remained blooming in the garden. When the doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, I took a deep breath before answering. My parents stood on the porch, my father in a conservative sweater rather than his usual holiday suit, my mother holding a store-bought pumpkin pie and wearing an expression of nervous determination. "Welcome," I said, stepping back to let them enter. "I'm glad you could come." They moved cautiously into my home, their eyes taking in the changes I'd made since they'd last seen the interior during the locksmith confrontation. I watched their reactions carefully, my father's slight frown at the colorful walls, my mother's widened eyes at the eclectic furniture arrangement so different from her coordinated decor. "Your house looks..." My mother paused, visibly choosing her words with care, "very much like you, Rachel. It has character." Coming from her, this was practically effusive praise for a design choice she wouldn't have made. I accepted the comment and the pie with equal grace, leading them to the living room where Diana and Michael were already chatting over appetizers. The initial introductions were stilted but civil. My father seemed particularly thrown by my diverse friend group so different from their socially homogeneous circle. But Diana, with her artist's warmth and social ease, managed to draw him into a surprisingly engaged conversation about local property values and historical preservation, while my mother found common ground with Elena over gardening tips. When Mark and Jen arrived, the atmosphere relaxed further. The presence of family members who moved between both worlds, my parents and mine, created a bridge that made the gathering feel less like opposing camps and more like a genuine blending of lives. Dinner itself exceeded my cautious expectations. The conversation remained largely on safe topics, with everyone seeming to tacitly understand the fragile nature of this piece. My mother complimented the turkey, which I had prepared according to my own recipe rather than her traditional method. My father asked appropriate questions about my friend's work and interests without the interrogative tone he typically used with my choices. There were moments of tension, a brief disagreement about politics that Michael skillfully redirected, my mother's instinctive attempt to rearrange the serving dishes that she caught herself mid-reach and stopped. But overall, the meal unfolded with a level of mutual respect I hadn't dared to hope for. As we finished dessert, my father cleared his throat in a way that typically preceded a pronouncement. I tensed slightly, preparing for whatever boundary test might be coming. "Rachel," he said formally, "I want to thank you for inviting us today. Your mother and I." He glanced at her, receiving a slight nod of encouragement. "We appreciate being included. You've created a lovely home here." The acknowledgement, so simple, yet so meaningful, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." Later, as guests were preparing to leave, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "This isn't what I imagined for you," she said quietly. "But I'm trying to understand that it's what you want." "It's difficult to adjust my thinking." "I know, Mom. I appreciate that you're trying." She hesitated, then added, "Perhaps next week, if you're free, we could have lunch. Just the two of us." The invitation was tentative, respecting my right to decline, a fundamental shift from her previous assumptions about my availability. "I'd like that," I said truthfully. "Tuesday works with my schedule." As I stood on my front porch waving goodbye to the last departing guests, Diana lingered behind, helping me gather empty glasses. "So that was your parents," she observed. "They're exactly as you described, but also somehow not what I expected." "How so?" "They're so human, flawed, trying in their imperfect way, carrying their own histories and fears. Doesn't excuse their behavior, of course, but I can see them as whole people rather than just the villains in your story." Her observation crystallized something I'd been feeling throughout the evening, that my own perception had shifted along with our relationship dynamic. As I had claimed my independence and set firm boundaries, I had paradoxically gained the freedom to see my parents more clearly, not just as the overwhelming forces that had dominated my life, but as individuals with their own limitations and capacities. "They're trying," I acknowledged. "It's not perfect, probably never will be, but it's different. Better." Later that night, after the dishes were done and the leftovers stored away, I sat in my garden beneath a clear night sky scattered with stars. The air had the crisp edge of late autumn, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. In the flower beds around me, most plants had retreated for winter, but the structural elements Diana had helped me incorporate: stone pathways, a small fountain, sturdy evergreen shrubs provided beauty even in the dormant season. Like my garden, my relationship with my parents had entered a different season, one with less vibrant display but perhaps more enduring structure. The boundaries I had established had not destroyed our connection as I had once feared. Rather, they had created the necessary space for something healthier to potentially grow. My house stood solid behind me, windows glowing warmly against the night. What had begun as a secret act of independence had evolved into the foundation for a more authentic life, not just in terms of property ownership, but in the courage to define myself on my own terms. In the months since that first confrontation on my front lawn, I had helped 3 friends navigate their own boundary journeys: a younger colleague whose parents were pressuring her about career choices, a neighbor dealing with an intrusive mother-in-law, and most recently, a support group newcomer facing a situation eerily similar to my locksmith standoff. "You make it look easy," the newcomer had said during our coffee meeting. "It wasn't easy," I'd corrected gently. "It still isn't sometimes. But it's worth it, worth every difficult conversation, every moment of guilt, every uncertain step, because on the other side is a life that's truly yours." Sitting in my garden under the vast night sky, I felt the truth of those words in my bones. The house around me, the life I was building, the relationships I was redefining or creating anew, all of it stemmed from that first brave choice to claim my independence, despite the chaos that followed. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members who couldn't respect your independence? Or are you still navigating that challenging journey? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might help someone else find the courage to take that first step. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to claim your own life while still loving the people who struggle to let you go. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the strongest foundations are built after the hardest storms.